Six heavy machine guns roar, 2,400 rounds per minute. A Japanese Zero disintegrates in midair, its lightweight frame no match for American firepower. June 1944. The Philippine Sea. The aircraft carrier USS Lexington launches wave after wave of a new fighter that the Japanese had never encountered in such numbers. This is the story of how American engineers transformed aerial warfare, not through elegance, but through overwhelming, calculated brutality. December 8, 1941. Clark Field, Philippines. Lieutenant Boyd Wagner stood on the tarmac at dawn, watching smoke rise from Pearl Harbor on every radio frequency. His P-40 Warhawk sat behind him, America's frontline fighter. 36 hours later, he would learn exactly how inadequate it was. The Japanese Zero arrived like a myth made metal. Wagner first saw one over Vigan 2 days after Pearl Harbor. It moved through the sky with an impossible grace. Tight turning radius, climbing vertically where his Warhawk would stall, dancing around his wingman like a matador around a bull. He fired, missed. The Zero pilot didn't even seem concerned. The enemy aircraft rolled inverted, pulled through, and was suddenly on Wagner's 6 o'clock. Cannon fire tore past his canopy. He survived by diving, the only thing his heavier aircraft could do faster. The encounter lasted 90 seconds. It felt like 90 minutes. By January 1942, the pattern was clear across the Pacific. At Rabaul, Japanese Zeros massacred Australian Wirraways. Over Java, they shredded Dutch Brewster Buffaloes. In Burma, they dominated the famous Flying Tigers P-40s. The mathematics were brutal. In the first 6 months of war, Zero pilots achieved kill ratios of 12.1, sometimes higher. The aircraft that created this dominance was in many ways a work of genius. Designed by Jiro Horikoshi, the Mitsubishi A6M Zero represented a philosophy, maneuverability above all else. Its engineers had stripped away everything unnecessary. No armor plating protecting the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks. No redundant systems. The result was an aircraft weighing just 3,700 pounds empty, nearly 2,000 pounds lighter than comparable American fighters. This weight savings translated into performance that seemed supernatural to Allied pilots. The Zero could turn inside anything the Allies flew. Its 925 horsepower Nakajima Sakai engine could push it to 331 mph, but speed was almost irrelevant. The Zero won by turning, climbing, outmaneuvering. Japanese pilots trained for years in peacetime, mastering aerial combat as a martial art. They entered the war as perhaps the most skilled fighter pilots on Earth, flying the most agile fighter aircraft. American pilots called it the Gray Ghost. Australian pilots called it the Killer. Everyone called it unbeatable. The psychological impact exceeded the tactical. When you know you're flying an inferior aircraft against a superior pilot, every combat becomes a death sentence. American fighter squadrons in early 1942 suffered not just losses but erosion of will. Pilots developed elaborate superstitions. Some refused to engage Zeros directly. Others requested transfers to bomber units, anything to avoid that distinctive silhouette. Commander John Thatch, stationed at Midway, spent February 1942 obsessing over the problem. He couldn't make his F-4F Wildcats lighter or more maneuverable. The laws of physics were unchangeable. But tactics could evolve. Using matchsticks on his kitchen table in San Diego, he developed the Thatch Weave, a mutual support pattern where two fighters protected each other in scissoring turns. It helped. Pilots using the Thatch Weave survived longer. But survival wasn't victory. And if that tactical innovation intrigued you, hit that like button. Because what came next didn't just change tactics. It changed the entire philosophy of air combat. And now, Act 2, The American Response, March 1942, Bethpage, Long Island. The Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation's design bureau looked less like an aviation company and more like a pressure cooker. Leroy Grumman stood over drafting tables surrounded by engineers who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Coffee cups formed geological layers. Cigarette smoke created its own weather system. The Navy's telegram sat on Grumman's desk. Design fighter to kill Zero. prioritize survivability and firepower. Delivery yesterday. Grumman Aircraft had a reputation for building tough aircraft. Their F-4F Wildcat, while inferior to the Zero in dogfighting, could absorb damage that would disintegrate Japanese fighters. Grumman's designers understood something fundamental. American pilots were more valuable than Japanese aircraft. The U.S. had a smaller pool of trained aviators. Losing a pilot meant losing thousands of hours of training, years of experience, institutional knowledge. The Japanese philosophy accepted casualties as inevitable. Bushido culture emphasized honor in death. Japanese pilots flew without parachutes in some cases. Ejecting was shameful. Their aircraft reflected this. Maximize performance, accept fragility. The American philosophy rejected this entirely. Lead designer William Schwendler, nicknamed Bill, had been studying Zero wrecks recovered from crash sites. One partial airframe sat in Grumman's hangar, salvaged from Akutan Island in Alaska after a relatively intact Zero force landed in June 1942. American intelligence had finally gotten their hands on the myth. What they found was revealing. The Zero's skin was thin, 70-75 aluminum alloy, 0.04 inches in most places. You could dent it with a firm push. The fuselage structure was minimalist, elegant, desperately fragile. Most tellingly, there was no armor. The fuel tanks were rubberized fabric, better than simple metal, but nothing like American self-sealing tanks with multiple layers of vulcanized rubber that could absorb bullets and automatically seal punctures. "We can't outturn this," Bill Schwendler told his team that March. "We can't outclimb it with our current engines, but we can outsurvive it, and we can outgun it." The XF-4FXF Hellcat prototype was born from this analysis. Where the Zero sought grace, the Hellcat sought dominance. Where the Zero minimized, the Hellcat maximized. First principle, protect the pilot. A 212-pound armor plate behind the pilot's seat. Bulletproof glass windscreen, 3 inches thick. More armor around the oil cooler and engine. Self-sealing fuel tanks with 3 layers of protection. The outer rubber layer would swell when punctured by enemy fire. The inner layers would seal the hole. A Hellcat could take 20 20mm cannon hits and still return home. Second principle, overwhelming firepower. 6 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns, 3 per wing, 400 rounds per gun. The combined rate of fire could pour 2,400 rounds per minute into a target. Each 50 caliber bullet weighed 1.7 ounces and traveled at 2,900 feet per second. When all 6 guns converged on a target, the impact was catastrophic. Zero pilots who survived encounters described it as flying into a metal rainstorm. Third principle, speed and climb. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower, more than double the Zero's output. The Hellcat weighed 9,238 pounds empty, but that massive engine could push it to 380 towers at altitude and climb at 3,500 feet per minute. The Hellcat was 2.5 tons heavier than a Zero. It turned like a truck compared to a sports car. It was less elegant, less refined, less beautiful. It was a flying tank designed for one purpose: killing Zeros. The prototype flew on June 26, 1942, exactly 6 months after Pearl Harbor. Test pilot Bob Hall took it up from Bethpage and pushed it through maneuvers. When he landed, his report was succinct. "This will win the war." The Navy ordered 1,080 aircraft immediately. By August, that order expanded to 2,545. Grumman's factory went to 24-hour operations. Workers, many of them women who'd never touched an aircraft before, assembled Hellcats at a rate that would eventually reach 17 aircraft per day. The production numbers told their own story. By war's end, Grumman would build 12,275 Hellcats. Japan would produce 10,139 Zeros total throughout the entire war. America would build more Zero killers than Japan built Zeros. But numbers meant nothing without pilots who could exploit the Hellcat's strengths. Act 3. The Doctrine of Boom and Zoom, May 1943. Naval Air Station Punane, Maui, Lieutenant Commander John L. Jimmy Flatley stood in a ready room filled with fresh naval aviators, most barely 22 years old. Behind him, a blackboard showed a simple diagram: 2 aircraft, 1 diving, 1 turning. "Forget everything the Japanese do," Flatley said. "You will not turn with a 0. You will not climb with a 0 at low altitude. You will not try to outmaneuver a 0. A hand went up. Ensign Harris, fresh from Pensacola. "Sir, then how do we fight them?" Flatley smiled. "We don't fight them. We kill them." The tactical doctrine that would define Hellcat operations was called boom and zoom, though pilots had cruder names for it. The principle was simple: use the Hellcat speed and climb rate to control the engagement geometry. Never turn. Never slow down. Never give the 0 pilot what he wanted: a maneuvering dogfight. The doctrine worked like this: start with altitude advantage. Hellcats would climb to 20,000, 25,000 feet, well above where most 0 patrols operated. Japanese pilots preferred 15,000, 18,000 feet, where their aircraft performed optimally. The Hellcat's superior engine and climb rate made gaining altitude easier. Identify targets below. The Hellcat had better pilot visibility than the 0. That thick armor and structural strength allowed for larger canopy glass. Pilots could spot enemy formations from miles away. Dive. This was the boom. Gravity in that massive engine would accelerate the Hellcat to over 400 mph. The 0 couldn't dive that fast. Its light structure would literally tear apart at speeds above 380 mph. Several 0 pilots died trying to dive away from Hellcats, their wings folding or tail surfaces disintegrating. Fire. The 650 caliber machine guns had ballistics computed for deflection shooting in high-speed passes. A 2-second burst would send 80 rounds into a target area. Against the 0's unarmored frame, even a handful of hits could be lethal. Fuel tanks would ignite. Control surfaces would shred. Pilots would die in their cockpits. Zoom. After the firing passed, the Hellcat pilot would use his speed to climb back to altitude. The 0 couldn't follow. It was slower in level flight and couldn't climb as fast. If a 0 tried to pursue a climbing Hellcat, it would stall out, becoming an easy target. Repeat. The Hellcat would loop back, regain altitude advantage, and attack again, and again, and again. Each pass took 30 to 60 seconds. A 0 pilot might evade once, twice, perhaps 3 times, but the 4th or 5th pass would connect. The 0's greatest strength, maneuverability, became irrelevant. You can't out-turn an opponent who refuses to turn. Jimmy Flatley's squadron was among the first to implement this doctrine systematically. In June 1943, during the invasion of the Marshall Islands, his VF-5 squadron flying Hellcats achieved a 26.1 kill ratio. 26 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 1 Hellcat lost, and that pilot survived, rescued by submarine. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots was severe. They had trained their entire careers for turn fighting. Quick maneuvers, instinctive reactions, martial artistry in 3 dimensions. Now they faced opponents who simply refused to engage on those terms. It was like a sword master facing an opponent with a rifle who stayed 100 yards away. Petty Officer Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's top aces, described fighting Hellcats in his post-war memoir. The Americans had learned. They would not be drawn into our fights. They struck from above, from the sun, and were gone before we could react. It was not combat. It was execution. Act 4. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, June 19, 1944, Philippine Sea, 150 miles west of Guam. The temperature at altitude was minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Lieutenant Alexander Vratsiu sat in his Hellcat's cockpit, 20,000 feet above an ocean that looked like hammered steel. His radio crackled. Multiple bogies, bearing 265, distance 80 miles, count approximately 250 aircraft inbound. The largest carrier aircraft battle in history was about to begin. The Japanese plan was desperate and ambitious. Operation A-Go would throw 9 aircraft carriers and 430 aircraft against the American fleet supporting the Mariana Islands invasion. Japanese commanders believed they could still achieve the decisive battle that would turn the Pacific War's momentum. They were catastrophically wrong. Against them, 15 American carriers, 7 battleships, and over 900 aircraft, more than 400 of them F-6F Hellcats. The Americans had radar. They had superior combat air patrol coordination. They had aircraft that could absorb damage. And they had pilots trained in the brutal efficiency of boom and zoom. The Japanese came in waves. The first wave of 69 aircraft approached at 10:30 a.m. Hellcats from multiple carriers dove into them like hawks into pigeons. Vratziu selected a target, a Zero leading a formation of dive bombers. He dove from above and behind, accelerated to 493, triggered his 6 guns. 2-second burst. The Zero's wing root exploded. The aircraft tumbled, trailing fire. Vratziu pulled up, looped, dove again. Another Zero, same result. In 8 minutes, he shot down 6 Japanese aircraft. He wasn't exceptional that day. He was typical. Ensign Wendell 12s got 5. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer got 4. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's top ace, got 7. Across the fleet, Hellcat pilots were experiencing what they would later call the turkey shoot, targets so numerous and poorly coordinated that running out of ammunition became the limiting factor, not finding enemies. The combat wasn't entirely one-sided. Japanese pilots showed their traditional skill and courage. Some penetrated the Hellcat screen and attacked the American fleet. The carrier Bunker Hill took a bomb hit, but the numbers were devastating. First wave, 69 Japanese aircraft launched, 42 shot down. Only about 20 reached the fleet. Second wave, 130 aircraft, 97 destroyed. Third wave, 47 aircraft, 40 destroyed before reaching targets. Fourth wave, 82 aircraft, 73 shot down. By day's end, the Japanese had lost 315 aircraft and 2 carriers. American losses, 29 aircraft, mostly from operational accidents or anti-aircraft fire from their own fleet. 0 pilot casualties exceeded 90%. Many Japanese carriers returned with only handfuls of surviving aircraft. The kill ratio that day exceeded 10:1. Some squadrons achieved 20.1 or better. Vratziu landed on USS Lexington at 6:47 p.m., his ammunition bins empty, his fuel gauge touching reserve. As he climbed out of his cockpit, deck crews saw the 6 kill markers painted on his fuselage and erupted in cheers. Someone handed him a Coke, lukewarm from the tropical heat, but he drank it like champagne. It was like an old-time turkey shoot, he told the intelligence officer during debrief. The name stuck. Hit that subscribe button because what happened after the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot would cement the Hellcat's legend forever. The killing had only begun. Akit 5th, The Mathematics of Annihilation, August 1944, aboard USS Essex, somewhere in the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant William Bill Dean sat in the ready room reviewing gun camera footage from the previous day's mission. The projector clicked, showing grainy black and white footage of a Zero attempting a split S maneuver to evade. The Hellcat's guns tracked smoothly. Flash. The Zero's tail section separated. The aircraft tumbled into the ocean. Dean had watched dozens of these films. The pattern was always the same. The Zero pilots were trying. They were brave. Some were skilled. It didn't matter. The aircraft itself betrayed them. When 6 .50 caliber machine guns converged on a Zero's airframe, the destruction was mechanical, almost predictable. The first rounds would puncture the thin aluminum skin. Within half a second, rounds would find fuel tanks. Without self-sealing protection, aviation gasoline would ignite almost instantly. The Zero would become a fireball, a characteristic that earned it the nickname, the flying lighter among American pilots. If the burst hit the wings, the lightweight structure would simply disintegrate. Zeros had minimal wing spars compared to American aircraft. A 2-second burst could literally saw a wing off. If the pilot survived the initial hit, he had seconds to bail out. Japanese pilots increasingly carried parachutes by 1944, but survival rates after bailing out were low. The Pacific was vast, and rescue assets were limited. The statistical reality by late 1944 was overwhelming. The average life expectancy of a Japanese Zero pilot in combat against Hellcats was approximately 3 missions. The numbers accumulated relentlessly. In the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, Hellcats destroyed 141 Japanese aircraft in 4 days. American losses, 17 aircraft. During the Philippines Liberation Campaign, the kill ratio reached 14:1. By Iwo Jima in February 1945, it was 19.1. The Hellcat wasn't just winning, it was eradicating Japanese naval aviation as an effective force. Commander David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces, finished the war with 34 confirmed kills, 30 of them zeros. His personal Hellcat, marked with Mincy 3, had survived 108 combat missions. It had taken damage multiple times: cannon fire, machine gun hits, shrapnel from anti-aircraft fire. The ground crews would patch the holes, test the systems, and send it back up. One incident epitomized the Hellcat's durability. During the Formosa air battle, McCampbell's wingman Lieutenant Roy Rushing took 21 20mm cannon hits and 67 7.7-meter machine gun hits. The Hellcat's right wing had a hole you could stick your head through. The tail surfaces looked like Swiss cheese. Rushing flew it back to the carrier and landed safely. Repairs took 4 days. The same aircraft flew again. No Zero could survive that level of damage. It was physically impossible given their construction. Actilex, the kamikaze response, October 25, 1944, off Samar, Philippines. Ensign Joseph McGraw watched something that made no tactical sense: a Zero dove toward his carrier group, not to drop bombs or strafe, but to physically crash into USS St. Lo. The aircraft hit the escort carrier's flight deck at 300 millimeters free, penetrating through to the hangar deck. The resulting explosion sank the ship. The Japanese had unleashed the kamikaze. When conventional tactics failed, Japan turned to suicide. The special attack units, kamikaze, represented both desperation and a cultural willingness to sacrifice everything. If Japanese pilots couldn't outfly or outfight American aircraft, they could become manned cruise missiles. The kamikaze tactic created new challenges for Hellcat pilots. A damaged bomber would turn away. A damaged kamikaze would keep coming. Shooting down a suicide attacker required complete destruction of the aircraft, not just damage, and the attacks came in coordinated waves designed to overwhelm defenses. But the Hellcat's firepower was designed for exactly this scenario. 650 caliber machine guns could literally disintegrate an incoming aircraft. Hellcat pilots developed new techniques: aim for the engine, destroy propulsion; aim for the wings, structural failure; aim for the cockpit if close enough, kill the pilot, stop the attack. At Okinawa in April 1945, Hellcats formed the primary defense against 1,900 kamikaze attacks over 3 months. They shot down approximately 650 suicide aircraft before they reached the fleet. The arithmetic was brutal but clear. A Hellcat cost approximately $50,000 to build. A Zero cost about $35,000, but a Hellcat pilot shot down an average of 6.7 enemy aircraft before being lost. The average Zero pilot by 1945 shot down less than 1 American aircraft. The industrial and tactical mathematics had become insurmountable. Act 7, the end of the Zero, August 15, 1945. Atsugi Airfield, Japan. Lieutenant J.G. William Shinneman flew his Hellcat low over Tokyo, part of the air cover for the surrender ceremonies. Below him, dozens of Zeros sat parked, many still armed, many with fresh paint. They never took off. The final statistics of the Pacific Air War told a story of total dominance. F-6F Hellcats destroyed 5,123 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. Hellcats lost in combat, 270. Overall kill ratio, 19.1, against Zeros specifically. Estimates ranged from 13.11 to 22.1, depending on theater. By comparison, the legendary P-51 Mustang in Europe achieved approximately 7.1 kill ratios. The Hellcat's performance exceeded every other Allied fighter in any theater. The reasons were systemic, not just mechanical. The Hellcat was designed through scientific analysis of a specific opponent. American engineers had studied captured Zeros, understood their strengths and weaknesses, and built an aircraft to exploit every vulnerability. American industrial capacity produced Hellcats faster than Japan could train replacement pilots. By 1944, the average Japanese naval aviator had 100 to 200 flight hours before combat. American pilots had 300,500 hours. The experience gap compounded the equipment advantage. American doctrine evolved to maximize the Hellcat's strengths. Boom and zoom tactics, radar control, coordinated carrier operations, everything worked together to create a system where Japanese pilots were fighting not just an aircraft, but an entire integrated war machine. But perhaps most critically, the Hellcat reflected a fundamental philosophical difference. Japanese aircraft design prioritized the weapon over the warrior. The Zero was optimized for performance, accepting that pilots were expendable. The Hellcat prioritized pilot survival, recognizing that trained aircrew were the most valuable resource. By war's end, Japan had lost approximately 30,000 naval aviators. The U.S. Navy lost about 8,200. The Hellcat's armor, self-sealing tanks, and structural strength saved thousands of American lives. Pilots who survived being shot down could be rescued, retrained, sent back into combat with accumulated experience. The Zero's fragility meant that being hit almost always meant death. Experience couldn't accumulate. Institutional knowledge couldn't transfer. Each loss was permanent. Epilogue: The Flying Iron Works, September 1945. Naval Air Station Punane, Maui. Lieutenant Commander John Bridgers walked through rows of parked Hellcats, most never to fly combat again. Many showed repairs, patches over bullet holes, replaced panels, welded structural elements. Every visible repair represented a pilot who came home. He stopped at F6F5 Bureau number 7234. This particular aircraft had 106 confirmed missions. It had been hit by ground fire 13 times, cannon fire twice. Once a Zero had collided with it during a dogfight, scraped along the wing, and both aircraft survived long enough to separate. The Zero crashed. The Hellcat flew home. Bridgers ran his hand along a patch where 20mm cannon rounds had hit the wing root. The armor had stopped them. The self-sealing fuel tank had prevented fire. The pilot, Ensign Thomas, survived, flew 50 more missions, went home to Nebraska. This aircraft, this one Hellcat, had shot down 11 confirmed enemy aircraft. It had probably saved 3 American pilots' lives through its durability. It had survived conditions that would have destroyed 5 Zeros. Someone had painted a name on the engine cowling: Grumman Iron Works. The Hellcat wasn't elegant. It wasn't beautiful. Japanese pilots never wrote poems about fighting it the way they did about the P-38 Lightning or the Corsair. The Hellcat was simply effective, brutally, mathematically, overwhelmingly effective. It was the weapon that broke the myth of the Zero. By 1946, most Hellcats would be scrapped or pushed off carrier decks into the ocean, surplus to peacetime needs, too expensive to maintain. A few would fly on in reserve squadrons. Some would be sold to Allied nations. But their legacy remained. 19.1. 19 enemy aircraft destroyed for every Hellcat lost. No other fighter in history achieved that ratio against a peer opponent. The Zero was unbeatable until American engineers decided it wasn't. They built a flying tank, trained pilots to use it properly, and produced it in numbers that made victory inevitable. The result wasn't just air superiority, it was annihilation. Bridgers pulled the canopy closed on F6F5 Bureau number 72340 one final time. Inside, the cockpit still smelled of oil, ammunition residue, and leather. The instruments were dark. The guns were empty. But the armor was intact. The fuel tanks were sealed. The structure was solid. The Hellcat had done its job. The war was over.